If you've been scrolling through endless rows of gaming rigs, watching the same top-tier specs flash across every thumbnail, and still feel stuck wondering which machine actually lets you play without compromise, you're not alone. The market throws you a million promises: ultra-fast SSD, ray tracing ready, future-proof memory, but the real question is whether any of those boxes translate into a smoother night in with friends, a hassle-free upgrade path, or a better bang for the bucks. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. I spent a good chunk of the past week setting up an MSI Pro DP180 in a small apartment, swapping out my old desktop for a fresh build that claims to be a rear ditto play powerhouse. I wanted to see how it handled the kind of mixed usage most of us have: a marathon of Elden Ring one night, a couple of hours of Valorant the next, then a late evening video editing session for a YouTube thumbnail. The idea was to test not just raw numbers, but the everyday friction points that rarely make it into a spec sheet. First off, the box arrives looking sleek, the kind of black chassis that blends into a home office without shouting gamer cave. Inside, the components are already assembled, which means you won't have to wrestle with cable management or BIOS updates before you can fire it up. That's a real plus for anyone who isn't a hardware hobbyist. Plug the power cord, connect a monitor, and the machine boots into Windows 11 Pro in under a minute. The OS is pre-installed and ready, so there's no waiting for drivers to download. MSI's own software pulls the Nvidia RTX 5070 drivers automatically, and the Wi-Fi 6E adapter connects to the router without any extra steps. Now, let's talk performance where it matters. In Elden Ring, the RTX 5070 kept the frame rate steady around 70 frames per second on ultra settings at 1440p. That's the kind of consistency that lets you explore the world without sudden dips that ruin immersion. When I dropped the settings to high for a quick session on a 1080p TV, the frame rate bumped to a buttery smooth 120 frames per second, meaning the card has headroom for future titles that might be a bit more demanding. On the lighter side, Valorant hit well over 200 frames per second, which is more than enough for competitive play where every millisecond counts. The 32GB of DDR5 RAM eliminated any stutter when I switched between a browser with dozens of tabs, Photoshop, and the game itself, which is a common scenario for streamers who need to keep the chat and overlays running. The 2TB NVMe SSD is another quiet hero. I installed the OS, my game library, and a few creative apps, and the boot times were sub 3 seconds. Even after a full night of downloads and a few large patches, the drive stayed cool and didn't throttle, thanks to the motherboard's decent thermal design. For a user who likes to keep a sizable library locally, the capacity feels generous without forcing you into external storage right away. One of the hidden trade-offs comes from the form factor. The DP180 is a mid-tower, but it's a bit deeper than a typical mini ITX case, so you'll need a desk that can accommodate a slightly larger footprint. It's not a problem in a dedicated gaming room, but in a cramped dorm or a home office with limited space, you might have to rearrange a few things. The cooling solution is adequate for the loads we threw at it, yet the fans are a little louder when the GPU hits 90°C during a prolonged Cyberpunk 2077 benchmark. The sound isn't obnoxious, but if you're sensitive to background noise while streaming or working, you may want to invest in a quieter fan or a small aftermarket heatsink. Another practical concern is upgrade flexibility. The motherboard supports PCIe 5.0, which is future-proof on paper, but the current case layout only gives easy access to the primary GPU slot and two M.2 slots. Adding a second graphics card or a larger liquid cooling loop would require opening the case and navigating a tight space. For most gamers, a single RTX 5070 will be sufficient for years, but power users who anticipate multiple GPUs for compute tasks might find the internal geometry limiting. Who should consider buying this rig? If you're a gamer who wants a solid out-of-the-box experience, values high refresh rates at 1440p, and also does a bit of content creation, the DP180 hits a sweet spot. The combination of a high-end GPU, ample DDR5 memory, and a roomy SSD means you won't have to juggle upgrades every 6 months. The built-in Wi-Fi 6E is another hidden win for apartment dwellers. I could stream a 4K video to a smart TV while the game stayed smooth, something older Wi-Fi standards sometimes struggle with. On the flip side, if you're a pure esports enthusiast who only needs 1080p, 300 frames per second performance, or a minimalist who plans to run a single game on a modest budget, you'll probably be overpaying for the extra RAM and storage. Likewise, users who live in very tight spaces should measure their desk dimensions before ordering, because the depth of the chassis,